Hello, friends. This is Dave Horowitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 16 pianists whose work I couldn't live without. These are the first names that came to mind. I want to make it clear, these are not the greatest pianists ever, at least in so much as we could actually make such a list. It's simply the artists whose work I turn to most frequently when I want to hear something that somebody wrote for the piano. And it's like, well, you tell me whether it's a good list or not, because you're going to give me yours, right? Up to 16. You can take as many of mine as you want, because it's all about who you listen to most often when you decide that you want to hear something written for the piano. And we begin with Alicia de Larrocha. Oh, she's wonderful. First of all, she's got the Spanish repertoire entirely covered, and Mozart, which is a pretty good, 1-2 punch in terms of what her recorded legacy was. And I've enjoyed it just for such a long time. But she also plays Ravel, and she plays even Rachmaninoff, and she does all kinds of stuff. Beethoven. She's a very reliable guide for what she did. She had teeny tiny hands. She once gave a master class on how to fake Rachmaninoff. That was really a lot of fun. That was a live thing. I don't know if it was ever recorded for YouTube. It was a long time ago. Anyway, the bottom line is she is one of my faves. Also, after that, Artur Rubinstein. Oh my God, how could you not include Artur Rubinstein? For Chopin, perhaps above all, the French repertoire, Beethoven, Brahms. I mean, the guy was, he's one of those fabulous all-around generalist pianists. He gives you a lot of bang for your buck. He really does. So he's number 2 on my list. These are in no particular order, by the way, and not in any kind of crescendo of betterness or anything like that. It's just how it came to my mind in the order it came into my mind, which is, I think, the most spontaneous and accurate way to get a fair list, a list that really reflects my genuine enthusiasms. Next, Nelson Freire. Nelson Freire was, even from his earlier days when he made those recordings of, piano concertos for Sony with Kempe that were on Odyssey, I just thought he was wonderful. But when he finally started making it at the end of his life, that series of recordings for Decca, he's one of the few artists whose work I really look forward to hearing and collecting. That was a wonderful, wonderful series of records. And it was so exciting because, he was an elder statesman at that point, and he was at the top of his game. And actually, he was still playing fabulously when he passed away. But it's a beautiful legacy, which Decca should waste no time boxing up, because a lot of it is out of print, and it's all good. It really is. There's no weak links in any of those Decca recordings that he made. Marc-André Hamelin. Oh, baby! I mean, ever since Music and Arts, the Alcan, the Alcan Concerto for solo piano, and then on New World, the Ives Concord Sonata. Hamelin or however you want to pronounce it, is your go-to guy for incredibly difficult, interesting, unusual repertoire. And he does usual repertoire fabulously. Boy, does he play Haydn well, for example. I mean, it's just amazing. But just about everything that he does is distinguished. His series of recordings for Hyperion is just one hell of a legacy. It really is. It's another thing where if it were in a box, there would be no greater set of piano repertoire ever. And it's so much of it's interesting and different. And he had it to himself, but he never took it for granted that he had most of it to himself, or nearly to himself. It was always done at the highest level, and in usually great sound. I mean, just a thrilling legacy, and a wonderful artist to follow as he winds his way through the highways and byways of the piano repertoire. And oh yes, Ivan Moravitz, the god of piano tone, of touch, of sonority, but also just incredible musicianship, very self-critical, very limited in what he recorded, but what he did was extraordinary. I mean, his Beethoven sonatas, the few that he recorded, the Beethoven Fourth Piano Concerto, his French music, his Debussy, his Franck. Oh my goodness, Franck piano music. It's just lovely. It's Chopin, and it's gorgeous, and it's a combination of sort of Walter Gieseking and Arturo Benedetti Michelangelo. You've got this hair trigger precision along with just a beauty of sonority. Really a remarkable guy. Truly a remarkable guy. Glenn Gould. Oh, of course, for the Goldberg variations and other Bach stuff, and also for his bizarre takes on the regular repertoire, Beethoven and Mozart, some of which was just terrible. But he was not just a pianist. He was a personality, one of the major musical figures in 20th century music for his attitude towards concertizing versus recording, his views of sonority, his handling of counterpoint. He was just, some people hate him, some people love him, but you can't ignore him. And it's always fun to go back to his recordings and listen to them and hear him humming along to Schoenberg. And, he was a thing. He really was. And always provocative, and sometimes just extraordinarily brilliant, amazingly brilliant. Then Leon Fleisher. Leon Fleisher, is on this list mostly for his collaborations with George Szell. I mean, Beethoven, Brahms Piano Concerti, Grieg Schumann Piano Concerti. He was also a wonderful, wonderful performer in, his own right, doing solo stuff. I mean, his Schubert sonatas are beautiful. There's quite a bit of really wonderful other work that he did. But those concerto recordings have swept to the boards for decades and decades, and they still sound fantastic. He was a wonderful artist before he had focal dystonia, which messed up his left hand, and so he had to stop playing for a long time. At the end of his life, he came back and made a few records that showed that his musically, interpretively, his powers remained undimmed. He was a tremendous artist and teacher, and I think that I grew up with this stuff. I really did, and again, it's a wonderful model to grow up with, because other people came along who you may prefer, or you may think were as good, or who did things wonderfully, but hey, again, you're up at a level that no one is going to surpass easily. And then let's see, someone who's not dead. Oh yeah, Stephen Osborne, one of a whole slew of first-class British pianists who were picked up by Hyperion, which was the British pianist label, basically. I mean, there are a lot of them. I mean, it was a very, 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 very good piano school in the 20th century. And Osborne I like particularly because he combines sort of a poetic thoughtfulness with an interesting approach to repertoire. I mean, he does Kapustin, he does Messiaen, he does gorgeous Debussy. He doesn't just do the German standard rep. And even when he does, excuse me, it tends to be quite special. He's a really probing and insightful artist. And he's another pianist whose recordings I enjoy. I collect them. When they come out, I'm excited because I know I'm going to get a certain level of quality and musical insight and musicianship, and it's going to be presented at a very, very high level, and sonically it'll be beautiful. So yeah, he's a guy worth looking out for. Zoltan Kocsis. Oh my God, he was a musician's musician. Just a tremendous musician, one hell of a nice guy. And his Rachmaninoff Piano Concerti, his Debussy, his Wagner excerpts, everything that he did was interesting and worth listening to. He had a composer's sense of the piano. I mean, his performances of the Bartók Piano Concerti, and I think that there is so much music in his playing, musicianship, so much awareness, and a lack of fuss at the same time. He had the chops to play just about anything, but when he did it, you have this feeling that he's creating it spontaneously as he goes, and it just couldn't be anything else. He's a wonderful, wonderful artist. Oh, goodness. Vladimir Ashkenazy. He made too many recordings. He truly did. A little bit like Artur Rubinstein, actually, in the sense that he did so much stuff, although Rubinstein had a more interesting range of repertoire, I think, than Ashkenazy did. Ashkenazy has sort of avoided, the French stuff and whatnot, although there's a little bit of Ravel, here and there. But, Rubinstein did not. But Ashkenazy was a wonderful, solid pianist who just could fill in all the gaps. I mean, if you wanted to hear Chopin's first piano sonata, if you wanted to hear, some of these pieces that weren't so familiar, because he did a complete everything and well, really well. I mean, he's taken for granted because he was so prolific. But, and some have said, oh, my God, how could he permit Decca to make such terrible sounding piano recordings? I don't think they're so bad. I mean, some of them were good, some of them were not. But generally speaking, he got decent sound. And I don't think Decca's piano sound was so terrible. It's a controversial issue, I know. But I have turned to him so many times just when I wanted to hear something I wasn't familiar with, because I could just pull out a box of Ashkenazy and I know that it would be good. And at the end of his life, I mean, he did some commission stuff. Rudolf Serkin wrote his third piano concerto for him, which he played very, very beautifully. There's a lot. Really a lot of very, very fine music making, although you have to dig around sometimes because, like I said, there's so much, too much duplication in his output. But that doesn't mean we should dismiss him, because there's a lot of stuff that, isn't as great as his greatest. On the whole, he was a very, very fine artist. Excuse me. He was a very, very fine artist who operated like all of these names at a very, very high level. So, yeah, he's on the list without a doubt. Rudolf Serkin. Well, he was sort of your go-to Beethoven guy, and also the Brahms concertos, the German repertoire. Mozart, he was just splendid, especially, when he was in his younger days. As he got older, he remade things again. He did too much. His late Mozart piano concertos on Deutsche Grammophon were nothing special. His late Beethoven's piano concertos with Ozawa on Telarc were not great. But, his earlier ones, those earlier ones were pretty fantastic. And his Beethoven sonatas, he never completed all of them, which I respect intensely. What he did do was pretty outstanding. His Diabelli variations were amazing. He has still recorded the only tolerable version of the Rager piano concerto. And, of course, there's all of his chamber music work and the stuff he did at Marlborough, which was absolutely wonderful. So, yes, definitely Rudolf. Claudio Arrau, another guy known for his burnished sonority. He was the guy who was made for the word burnished. Some people like his earlier stuff better than his slower, heavier late stuff. For Phillips, I think he was amazing. I mean, he had a sound. It's so rare, especially with pianists, because it's a piano. I mean, you're not building it, and there's only so much you could do to change what it sounds like. But he did somehow. He was a student of a pupil of Liszt, and that made a big difference for some reason. He believed in Bebung, the idea of piano vibrato, which doesn't really exist, but which you could pretend does, and which changes the way you attack the keys. I mean, with him, it was not finger work. It was from the body. He leaned into the keyboard. It's what my colleague Jed Disler called deep in the keys. He was deep in the keys, and his recordings are unforgettable. I mean, and so much is great. I mean, he did great Liszt, he did great Chopin, he did great Beethoven. My goodness, he did great Beethoven, he did great Brahms, he did great Debussy. He carved out in each repertoire area that he attacked his own special place. And so he's one of the great musical voices of the 20th century. Oh, yeah. Vladimir Horowitz. Thought I wasn't going to mention him, right? Of course we have to mention him. We do. He was erratic. But he was so brilliant. And when he was at his best, he was unbelievable. Absolutely incredible. And he was also sort of one of those, great romantic types. He would futz with texts and change things around and make his own versions of things and, cut and snip and paste and whatever. and do it all with this sort of, impish glee that was wonderful. I like him best for not for the crazy virtuosic romantic stuff, but for the pieces he did that others weren't doing, for his Scarlatti sonatas, for his Clementi sonatas, things like that. The repertoire, even in his later stuff when he started doing, Mozart and Schubert, things that were less flashy, he still had, it showed you that he had this wonderful musical impulse that really permeated all of the best stuff he did. It really did. The fact that he was Toscanini's son-in-law was like a thing. They made some recordings together which don't particularly appeal to me. I mean, some of them aren't bad. I mean, they're not bad, but I just think that as a solo pianist, doing Liszt and Chopin and, the big romantic stuff, he was pretty special. He really was. And there's a lot of it to dig around in and play with. Martha Argerich. Oh, my goodness. Yes, she is a well, everyone calls her a force of nature, and that's what she is. I mean, she just gives the impression of being totally improvised and willful and thrilling and spontaneous and just a gusher of music. At least she gave that impression before she made 475 recordings of the same pieces over and over again, each less good than the one that came previously. Even though she is still playing at a very, very high level and could do anything. She was so quirky. I mean, there are very few solo recordings, but the ones that exist, her Gaspard de la Nuit, the Liszt Sonata, this stuff is just fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. But, the things that she did are chamber music recordings, the Shostakovich Trio, and there's some amazing, amazing things. The Bartók Sonata for two pianos and percussion with Nelson Freire, and Stephen Kovacevic. I just really, she was a fabulous chamber music partner. She is a fabulous chamber music partner. Her concerto recordings are extraordinary. I wish her repertoire were larger. With somebody of her gifts has earned the right to do anything she damn well pleases, but she doesn't have to record it all. We don't have to listen to all of it, But what she did well, again, you still reach for her Prokofiev Third Piano Concerto, her Ravel G Major, and so many other things besides. She's just a marvel. And let's see who else have we got here. Earl Wild. Oh, wow, yeah. A virtuoso's virtuoso. A composer, a pianist, a commentator. His autobiography is fabulously chatty and gossipy and bitchy. He was just wonderful. Oh, my goodness. And he's the person you go to still when you want to hear the Rachmaninoff Concerti, when you want to hear Gershwin, and when you want to hear a lot of those, the people who are on the Hyperion Romantic Piano Concerto series, people like Charvenka, those concertos that were on the fringe of the repertoire, written by the great 19th century and early 20th century virtuosi that were completely unknown. He could have done so much more. These days, could you imagine if Hyperion had signed him and had he been a little bit younger? Wow. We could have had like all that stuff with Earl Wild behind it. Although Hyperion's series is wonderful, don't get me wrong. But, he was doing that stuff at a time when nobody was doing it. He was a free spirit, a law unto himself. He made fabulous transcriptions of Rachmaninoff and others. I mean, he was really a pianist, a virtuoso in the Liszt tradition, in the best Liszt tradition, and he played great Liszt. He did. So yeah, he's a guy, again, another one who's he's just fun to listen to. You always know you're going to have a good time when you listen to an Earl Wild disc. You may not think it's the greatest thing you've ever heard in your life, but there's no questioning the sheer joy in being able to make music at the keyboard that he conveys. He was really, really special, and he kept his technique well into his 80s. He was really, really fantastic that way. Next, oh gosh, last but not least, pardon me, Stephen Huff, another one of that wonderful school of British pianists. And Huff is a really wonderful combination of virtuosity and intelligence. He's a smart pianist. He's made a lot of records, some wonderful concerto recordings, a stunning Rachmaninoff cycle, absolutely first class, and his Chopin and other stuff has been superb. I just think he's one of the great pianists working today. He's also a composer, and he wrote an interesting autobiography, and he's got he's an all-around smart guy, a really full, complete package musician who happens to play the piano and play it extraordinarily well. So he's another pianist whose recordings I really look forward to. Ever since his early stuff on Virgin, remember the early Liszt recordings and some other things. I mean, it was always something out of the ordinary in his recordings. Again, whether you like them or don't like them, you can't deny that there's a seriousness to his approach and a knowing musical completeness to what he does that I think is very, very powerful. I mean, that's how it impresses me anyway. So there you have it. My 16 pianists whose work I couldn't live without. I'm very curious to hear yours. Up to 16. Give it a shot. Let me know what you think. And keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.